Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Pizza Tlayuda. That's right, I'm going to show you how to make a crispy thin crust pizza inspired by one of Oaxaca's most famous street foods. And since we're using tortillas, there's no dough to make. So besides being gorgeous and incredibly delicious, these are also very fast and easy to put together. In fact, the hardest thing about this is trying to pronounce Tlayuda, since it starts with a T and an L. So that might take some practice, but the actual recipe will not. And to get started, I'm going to go ahead and cut up a pound of pork shoulder for what is definitely an optional step. Okay, I'm going to make what I'm calling a crispy pork butter, which is my take on what my Oaxacan friends would call asiento, which is basically a spread made with the lard and leftover meat scraps when they make carnitas or chicharrones. And apparently it's used in all kinds of things, including being spread on tlayudas or added to the beans that are spread on them. And to simulate that, I'm going to place my pork pieces over medium-high heat, along with a little bit of oil to get things started. And I'm going to cook that, stirring occasionally, until the pork starts to simmer in its own juices. At which point I'm going to reduce the heat to low, and then cook this, stirring occasionally, for about an hour to an hour and a half, or until those pieces of pork have basically been cooked crisp. Well, not basically, they've been cooked crisp. And once that happens, I transfer it into a bowl, along with any and all that rendered fat. And since I was making this ahead of time, once that cooled down, I went ahead and wrapped it up, and I popped it in the fridge overnight. And then the next day I pulled it out and transferred it onto a cutting board. And then I took a knife and started chopping, and I kept chopping for about 5 minutes, or until I had a fairly fine paste. And again, this step is completely and absolutely optional. And truth be told, I make this pizza vegetarian almost all the time. But for a meat lover like myself, I do think it's better with this added to the beans. But anyway, the point is, if you're not into meat, or can't handle the time or effort it takes to do this, then please simply skip to the refried bean step. But anyway, once that was chopped, I added it to a bowl, and I tossed in some soft butter, since I didn't have any lard. Okay, in Oaxaca, we're definitely using lard. I also tossed in some salt, as well as some freshly ground black pepper. And that's it, I grabbed a spoon and gave it a mix. And once that is all combined, our crispy pork butter is ready to use. And by the way, if you're not making this pizza, I can think of about 100 things that would be good for, and I'm sure you can as well. But anyway, once that's set, we can go ahead and refrigerate that until needed, and then we can move on to our refried black beans, which is going to start with a little bit of avocado oil in a saucepan, to which we will add some sliced green onion, as well as some minced up garlic, plus of course a little pinch of salt as usual. And what we'll do is saute that on medium heat for about a minute. And once that's been accomplished, we'll go ahead and toss in some cumin, some freshly ground black pepper, as well as a little bit of ancho chili powder. And we will stir all that together and saute that for about 30 seconds, just to kind of wake up those spices. At which point, to stop any further sauteing, we will go ahead and dump in some cold fresh water, followed by the star of the show, 1 can of drained, but not rinsed, black beans. And then what we'll do is go ahead and toss in the rest of our salt, along with some Mexican oregano, if you can find it, or just regular oregano. And then we'll finish up with a few shakes of cayenne, plus last and certainly not least, a nice big heaping spoon of our crispy pork butter. And we'll go ahead and stir that in, and we'll wait for this to come to a simmer, at which point we'll let this cook for about 5 minutes. Right, this really doesn't need much time, since everything's cooked. But we do want to give all those ingredients a little bit of time to get acquainted. And then what we'll do is grab a potato masher, since they don't sell bean mashers. And we will go ahead and carefully work this over until it's as smooth as we want it to be, which for me is going to be fairly smooth. Oh, and by the way, I love the appearance of the black beans in this. But of course, if you want to use another kind of bean, go ahead. I mean, you are after all the kitty margolis of your frijoles. And something like pinto beans would be perfectly fine here. But anyway, once we have that smashed and mashed to our liking, we will simply let this simmer for another 5 minutes or so, or until we're completely happy with the taste and the texture. And please note, we do want this fairly thin and spreadable, and it will definitely thicken up as it cools. So at this point, I don't think we want it any thicker than this. And since that was looking just about perfect, I went ahead and turned off the heat. And then to finish this, what we'll do is squeeze in the juice of 1 lime, And other than stirring that in and tasting for seasoning, our refried black beans are ready to use as a pizza sauce. Except before that, we have to make our crust. And by crust, I mean tortilla. And for that, we will add a generous spoon of avocado oil to a skillet that we have set over medium heat. And we will toss in a large flour tortilla, and we'll turn that over and make sure it's coated on both sides with that oil, which I'm doing with my fingers since the pan's not hot. Okay, if the pan is hot, our legal department would like me to suggest that you use a brush or a spatula. And then all we need to do here is toast this for a few minutes on each side, or until it's golden brown and starts to get crispy. Okay, we don't need to go too far, since we are still going to bake this in a hot oven. But for optimum texture and maximum crispiness, we do want to make sure it's fairly well browned at this point. And there are so many things that aren't authentic about this recipe that I really don't know where to start. But the biggest difference is in Oaxaca, a tlayuda is normally made with a giant corn tortilla. And what they do is fry that crispy, and then they spread it with beans and Oaxacan cheese and all sorts of toppings. But we can't get those tortillas here, which is actually fine, since for this baked pizza version, I think the flour tortilla actually works out better. But anyway, once we have that tortilla nicely golden brown on both sides, we'll go ahead and transfer that to a parchment lined sheet pan, and we will top that with our refried beans, which we will spread out almost, but not quite to the edge. And as I already mentioned, we're using the black beans like a pizza sauce. And believe it or not, there's actually some similarities to actual pizza sauce, which of course is sweet and savory and acidic, and it almost always includes garlic and oregano. Well, here, even though it's black beans, we kind of have some of the same things going on. Okay, black beans have that little bit of earthy sweetness, and they're definitely savory. And besides the garlic and oregano, we also have that beautiful acidity from the lime juice. So even though completely different, this really does work beautifully. And that's it. Once our crust has been beaned, we'll go ahead and top that with a couple ounces of grated cheese, which in my case is Monterey Jack. But of course, if you can find Oaxacan cheese, go ahead and use that, since it is very similar to mozzarella. Okay, maybe it's a touch tangier, but virtually identical in the way that it melts. So that would be great. But the Monterey Jack definitely has more flavor, so that's my first choice. And then once the cheese is down, we can go ahead and add our vegetables. And in a shocking plot twist, I'm going to use Brussels sprout leaves. Oh yeah, you did not see that coming. And all I do is cut off the bottom and then separate the leaves. And the smaller ones I'll just put on whole. And then the bigger ones I'll tear in half. And I know you're skeptical, but this really does pair perfectly with the black beans and everything else we're going to put on here. Plus the thin edges of the leaf will char in the oven, which adds an extra smoky element to the flavor profile. So even if you don't like Brussels sprouts, I must insist you add them here. And then besides those, I'm also going to scatter over some freshly sliced green onions, which are never not great on pizza. And then before this goes in the oven, I think we should do a nice drizzle of olive oil over the top, or if you want some more avocado oil. And then last but not least, we will sprinkle over a big pinch of salt. And that's it. Our Oaxacan-inspired pizza is now ready to transfer into the center of a 450-degree oven for about 10 minutes, or until our crust is crispy and our cheese is melted and the edges of our Brussels sprouts are beautifully charred. And then as soon as that comes out, I like to transfer it onto a cooling rack, which is going to help keep this beautifully crispy. And then we should probably let this rest for at least 5 minutes to sort of set up and cool down a little bit. And while that's happening, we can finish garnishing the top. And I'm going to start with something you're probably not going to be able to add. Okay, we just started growing a purple spinach called orac or orach, which besides being very nutritious, is absolutely gorgeous. But anyway, I just had a few leaves, so I tore them up and put them on. And then besides that, I'm also going to do some thinly sliced radishes, which I think also look great. And then because this is not authentic, and we get to do whatever we want, I'm going to drizzle over some fermented Asian-style hot chili sauce, which I think pairs beautifully with the flavor of those Brussels sprouts. But obviously, use any green or red salsa you want. And then for one final touch, I scattered over some micro cilantro. And if you want to use that, which you should, you have to grow your own cilantro so that you have access to those tiny tender tops. And that's it, I scattered those over. And my pizza Tlayuda was ready to enjoy. Or is it pizza Tlayuda? Or is it pizza Tlayuda? Anyway, we'll practice. So I went ahead and transferred that onto a plate, and then we'll cut that into 4 pieces. And if everything goes according to plan, as we do, it should sound like this. Oh yeah, that crust is crispy, which just happens to be the perfect delivery system for enjoying these incredible refried beans and roasted vegetables and all those other toppings we added. And I usually start with just 1 bite, or sometimes 2 if it's really good. Well, this time I did 3. And I wasn't kidding that I really hope you try the Brussels sprouts. But if you don't do it with those, this technique would be a perfect catch-all for any seasonal vegetables you might want to use up. Alright, keep in mind this only cooks for 10 minutes. So if the veggies are raw, they have to be really thin, or you simply have to pre-cook them first. But there are not a lot of things, meat or vegetable, that I don't think would be delicious on this. Oh, and one last reminder, if you want yours to come out this crispy, make sure you get that tortilla nice and golden brown. And yes, we did invest a good amount of time to make that pork butter and to make our refried beans from scratch. But if you're in a hurry, you can skip the pork. And if you're really in a hurry, I would not be upset if you just opened up a can of refried beans and used those. Okay, as long as you promise to top this with some nice vegetables and use cheese that's not pre-grated, all will be forgiven. But whether you go full asiento or you make this vegan, either way, this Oaxacan Tlayuda inspired pizza really was amazing, which is why I really do hope you give it a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.